A billionaire needed a fake fiancé to close the biggest deal of his life, and he chose a humble florist who was just trying to save her tiny shop. At first it was all business, smiles for cameras, handshakes for investors, but the moment she walked into his world, everything changed, because she wasn't just a way to close a deal. She became the one person who reminded him what a real life could feel like. Then the truth hit. Her past was tied to the one mistake his company tried to bury. Suddenly, the board demanded he cut her off or lose everything he built. And when she heard what they said about her behind closed doors, her heart shattered. Now he has one impossible choice: protect his empire or fight for the woman who brought him back to life. But if he walks away from the company, will she believe he chose her for love, or just out of guilt? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun filtered through the storefront windows of Bloom and Grace, casting gentle shadows across buckets of fresh flowers. Aria Moore's fingers moved with practiced care as she arranged pristine white lilies in a crystal vase, their sweet fragrance filling the quiet shop. Each stem found its perfect place under her touch, but her mind wandered to the stack of unpaid bills in her office drawer. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the morning stillness. "Just send enough customers today to make rent." She glanced at the calendar on the wall. The 15th of the month, already 3 days late. The antique brass bell above the door remained stubbornly silent as morning crept into afternoon. Aria busied herself with inventory, straightening displays, and misting the delicate blooms that were her livelihood. Each hour that passed without a customer made her heart sink a little lower. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the bell finally chimed. Aria looked up from her work, and her breath caught slightly. A man stood in the doorway, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his tie loosened as if he'd been running his fingers through it in frustration. Despite his obvious weariness, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from being in charge. "Welcome to Bloom and Grace," Aria said warmly, setting aside her clippers. "Can I help you find something specific today?" The man, Louis Dalton, though Aria didn't know it yet, ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I honestly don't know," he admitted. "I was walking past and something about your window display." He gestured vaguely at the cascade of purple wisteria and white roses. "I just needed a moment of quiet." Aria's heart softened at the obvious strain in his voice. Years of working with customers had taught her to read people's needs, even when they couldn't express them themselves. "Sometimes flowers speak better than words," she said gently. "Would you like to look around? Take all the time you need." Luis nodded gratefully and began to wander between the displays. Aria watched as his shoulders gradually relaxed, his breathing becoming deeper and more even as he took in the peaceful atmosphere of the shop. She recognized the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. "These are beautiful," he said, pausing by a collection of deep blue delphiniums. "They remind me of—" His voice trailed off, and Aria saw a flash of old pain cross his face. Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside the shop. Through the window, Aria saw a middle-aged woman in jogging clothes stumble and collapse onto the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Aria rushed to the door, her heart pounding. "Call 911!" she called over her shoulder to Luis as she ran outside. The woman lay motionless on the concrete, her face taking on a frightening bluish tinge. Aria dropped to her knees beside her, quickly checking for a pulse. Finding none, she immediately began chest compressions. "Come on," she murmured, counting rhythmically as she pressed down on the woman's chest. "Stay with us." She could hear Luis speaking urgently on his phone behind her, giving their location to emergency services. Years ago, Arya had taken a CPR course at her church, never expecting to use it. Now, all that training kicked in automatically. Time seemed to slow down as she continued compressions, pausing only to give rescue breaths. The concrete scraped her knees through her dress, but she barely noticed. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the woman gasped and coughed. Arya turned her gently onto her side, maintaining contact and speaking softly to keep her calm. In the distance, sirens wailed. The paramedics arrived in a blur of efficiency, taking over the woman's care. As they loaded her into the ambulance, one of them turned to Arya. "You saved her life," he said simply. "If you hadn't started CPR when you did—" Arya just nodded, suddenly aware of her shaking hands and aching knees. She walked back into her shop on unsteady legs, grabbing a broom to sweep up the flower petals scattered during her rush to the door. The familiar motion helped calm her racing heart. She became aware of Luis still standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was it admiration? Recognition? Something deeper? "That was remarkable," he said quietly. Arya shook her head, focusing on her sweeping. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Luis said firmly. "They wouldn't have. And I should know." He took a step closer, his voice soft with memory. 5 years ago at the Spring Garden Charity Gala, a woman collapsed during the auction. Someone performed CPR, saved her life, then disappeared before anyone could thank her properly. Arya's hand stilled on the broom handle as the memory surfaced. She had been there working as a server to earn extra money, wearing a standard black uniform, like dozens of others. "That was my wife, Claire," Luis continued. "She had another year with us because of what you did that night. I never found out who it was, but watching you today—" His voice cracked slightly. "Same calm focus, same steady hands. It was you, wasn't it?" Arya's eyes met his, and in that moment something shifted in the air between them. A recognition of connections that ran deeper than chance, of lives touching in ways that only God could orchestrate. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, letting the weight of revelation settle around them like fallen petals. Luis stood in the doorway of bloom and grace, his earlier weariness transformed into something else entirely as he watched Arya continue her quiet work. Through the windows, late afternoon sun painted everything in soft gold, and the scent of lilies filled the air with their sweet perfume. Both of them could feel it, the sense that their lives had just shifted in a way neither could yet name, like the first whisper of spring after a long winter. They remained, in that moment, surrounded by flowers and unspoken possibilities, as the busy world continued to move past the shop windows. Sometimes the biggest changes come in the quietest moments, wrapped in the ordinary grace of an afternoon that started like any other, but ended as something altogether different. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Dalton Tech boardroom, but Luis Dalton felt no warmth from it. Dark circles shadowed his eyes after a night of tossing and turning, his mind replaying yesterday's events at the flower shop over and over. Now he sat at the head of a gleaming conference table, surrounded by stern faces and starched collars. "The merger with Asian markets is critical," Board Director Thompson stated, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. "But their conservative leadership has concerns about your personal life." Luis's jaw tightened. "My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to run this company. On the contrary," Patricia Chen, another board member, interjected. She tapped her manicured nails against a stack of reports. "Your bachelor status makes you appear unstable in their eyes, unpredictable. They want assurance of consistent leadership." "You mean they want me married?" Luis's voice was flat. "Within 6 months," Thompson confirmed. "Before the merger signing. Otherwise they'll walk, and take 30% of our market value with them. Louis stood abruptly, walking to the window. The city sprawled below, a maze of buildings he'd helped shape through years of dedication. His company, his life's work. And now they wanted to dictate his personal choices too. This is the 21st century, he argued. Surely. This is business, Thompson cut in, and feelings don't factor into it. Find someone suitable, make it official, or prepare to step down. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Luis left the meeting in a haze, his driver already waiting with the car door open. The flower shop, he said automatically, then caught himself. Bloom and Grace. Inside the small store, Aria was arranging white roses in a crystal vase, humming softly to herself. She looked up as the bell chimed, and her warm smile faltered slightly at his serious expression. Mr. Dalton, is everything all right? Luis ran a hand through his dark hair. Please, call me Luis. And no, not exactly. He paced the small space between displays. I need to talk to you about something. Unusual. Aria set down her scissors, giving him her full attention. Would you like some tea? I keep some in the back for slow afternoons. 10 minutes later, they sat in 2 mismatched chairs in Aria's small office, steaming mugs between them. Luis took a deep breath. Yesterday, watching you save that woman's life, it reminded me that there are still genuine people in the world. People who act from the heart, not just for profit or appearances. Aria wrapped her hands around her mug. That's kind of you to say, but I need to ask you something. Luis leaned forward. My company is facing a crucial merger. The other party is extremely traditional, and they're demanding I be engaged, married eventually, before they'll sign. Aria's eyes widened. That seems rather personal. It is. It's also non-negotiable. He pulled out a leather folder. I'm proposing a contract, 6 months of public appearances, charity events, photos for the press. Nothing romantic, nothing real. Just presence. In return, you'd receive compensation that would secure your future and your shops. As if on cue, a shadow passed the window, the property manager taping another late notice to the door. Aria's face flushed as she hurried to snatch it down, but Luis had already seen. I don't expect an answer right now, he said quietly. Take the day to think about it. The contract's all there, terms, compensation, everything clearly spelled out. He stood, straightening his jacket. I'll need to know by this evening. Aria stared at the folder on her counter, her throat tight. This is a lot to process. I know. Luis paused at the door. For what it's worth, I wouldn't ask if I saw any other way, or if I didn't think you were someone I could trust with this. The day passed in a blur. Aria moved through her tasks mechanically, arranging flowers, helping customers, checking inventory. But her eyes kept straying to that leather folder, sitting innocent and life-changing on her counter. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her shop floor, she finally locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The late notice crumpled in her pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Aria picked up the folder, running her fingers over its smooth surface. Inside lay a choice. Security for her struggling business, yes, but also deception. A chance to help someone else, but at what cost to her own integrity? The evening, light painted patterns on her counter as she stood there, caught between fear and hope, holding what felt like her future in her trembling hands. Her shop was quiet except for the gentle hum of the flower cooler. Through the windows, she could see the city settling into evening, street lights flickering on one by one. The contract waited, neither good nor bad, simply present, like destiny holding its breath, waiting for her answer. Arya woke before dawn, her mind already churning with the weight of the decision before her. The morning light hadn't yet touched her small apartment above the flower shop when she reached for her phone and dialed the one person who always helped her see clearly. "Aunt Lila, I'm sorry to call so early, but I really need your wisdom right now." Her aunt's voice came through warm and steady, despite the early hour. "Child, you know I'm always here for you. What's troubling your heart?" Arya took a deep breath and explained everything: Luis's visit, the contract, her struggling shop. Her voice trembled as she finished. "I don't know if this is right or wrong, Aunt Lila. I keep praying for guidance, but sometimes," Aunt Lila said gently, "the Lord works in unexpected ways. Tell me honestly, what does your heart say about this man's character?" "He's honorable," Arya replied slowly. "Beneath all that corporate armor, I sense a genuine person who's hurting, someone who needs help but doesn't know how to ask for it normally. Then maybe this isn't just about saving your shop, honey. Maybe you're being called to help someone else find their way back to themselves." After hanging up, Arya knelt beside her bed and prayed, tears sliding down her cheeks as she asked for clarity. When she finally stood, her heart felt lighter, more certain. She texted Luis, asking him to come to the shop at 7 o'clock before her regular opening time. He replied immediately with a simple, "I'll be there." The early morning quiet wrapped around her as she prepared the shop, turning on soft lights and brewing fresh coffee. The familiar scents of roses and lilies helped steady her nerves. At precisely 7 o'clock, Luis arrived, looking impeccable in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. Arya gestured to her small wooden table in the corner, where she'd set out coffee and some freshly baked muffins from the bakery next door. "I'd like to go through the contract thoroughly," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "If we're going to do this, I need to understand everything." Luis nodded, pulling out a chair for her before taking his own seat. "Of course, that's wise." Together, they went through every clause. Luis explained each point patiently as Arya asked questions. The compensation made her breath catch. It would not only save her shop, but secure its future for years to come. "These public appearances," she said, pointing to a particular section. "What exactly would they entail?" "Mainly charity events, some business dinners, occasional red carpet functions," Luis explained. "Nothing inappropriate or compromising. Your dignity and privacy are paramount. That's written into the contract." Arya's finger traced the words on the page. "And after 6 months? We announce an amicable parting of ways. You'll receive the full compensation regardless, and your reputation will be enhanced, not damaged. I've made sure of that." She studied his face, finding sincerity in his tired eyes. With hands that trembled slightly, she picked up the pen he offered. "I've prayed about this," she said softly. "I believe this is the right choice, even if it's not a conventional one." Luis watched as she signed her name, something like relief crossing his features. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know this isn't easy. When—" Arya cleared her throat. "When does this start?" "Tonight, if you're willing. Dinner at Laurent's? It's a high-profile restaurant where we're sure to be noticed, but the food is actually excellent." He managed a small smile. "I'll send a car for you at 6 o'clock. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Arya worked mechanically through her orders, her mind racing ahead to the evening. At 3 o'clock, she closed the shop early and went upstairs to prepare. She chose her best dress, a deep blue cocktail dress that Aunt Lila had helped her buy for special occasions. Her hands shook as she applied makeup and pinned her curls into an elegant updo. Each step felt like moving further from her old life and closer to something unknown. At exactly 6 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside the shop. Luis stepped out, handsome in a perfectly tailored suit, and walked to her door. He offered his arm with old-world courtesy. Ready? He asked quietly. Arya took a deep breath, remembering Aunt Lila's words about being called to help. Ready, she replied, slipping her hand through his arm. The drive to Laurent's was quiet, broken only by Louise's gentle warnings about what to expect. There will be photographers, he said. Just stay close to me. You don't have to say anything. The car pulled up to the restaurant's entrance. Through the tinted windows, Arya could see the flash of cameras already starting. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure Louise must feel it through their linked arms. Remember, Louise said softly as the driver opened the door, you're doing me the favor. You have nothing to prove to anyone. Arya straightened her shoulders and stepped out of the car on Louise's arm. Camera flashes exploded around them like stars, voices calling out questions and names. She felt Louise's arm tighten protectively around hers as they walked toward the restaurant's entrance, and she forced herself to smile naturally, even as her heart raced at this first step into her new life. Inside Laurent's, the lighting was soft and golden, casting elegant shadows across white tablecloths and crystal glasses. Arya felt her breath catch as Louise guided her through the restaurant. Every table seemed occupied by people who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Women draped in designer dresses, men in perfectly tailored suits discussing million-dollar deals. Just breathe, Louise whispered, his hand warm against her back as he pulled out her chair. You're doing fine. Their table was positioned centrally, impossible to miss. Arya recognized Charles Bennett, CEO of a major tech company, and his wife Victoria sitting across from them. Two other couples joined them, all board members. Arya realized with a jolt of anxiety. So, Miss Moore, Victoria said, her smile sharp with curiosity. Louise tells us you own a flower shop? Arya's fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. Yes, Bloom and Grace. It's a small boutique florist in the historic district. Quaint, Victoria commented, making the word sound less than complimentary. Louise smoothly interrupted. Arya's arrangements are featured in several high-end hotels downtown. She has quite the eye for design. The waiter arrived with wine menus, and Arya felt lost looking at the extensive selection. Louise leaned close, his shoulder brushing hers. The Chardonnay is excellent, if you'd like. She nodded gratefully, letting him order for both of them. As conversations about market shares and quarterly reports swirled around her, Arya focused on remembering to breathe. The silverware seemed excessive, the menu items unnecessarily complicated. But then Charles Bennett mentioned his daughter's upcoming wedding, and Arya found herself in familiar territory. What flowers are you considering? She asked, genuine interest warming her voice. Oh, she can't decide. Victoria sighed. The wedding planner is at her wit's end. Sometimes it helps to think about the meaning behind different flowers. Arya offered. For instance, peonies represent prosperity and a happy marriage, while ranunculus symbolize charm and attractiveness. You could combine them with roses for love, creating a story through the arrangements. The table fell silent, and for a moment Arya worried she'd said too much. Then Victoria leaned forward, clearly intrigued. That's fascinating. Would you be willing to consult with our wedding planner? Louise's hand found hers under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze of encouragement. As the evening progressed, Arya found herself relaxing. She shared stories about memorable wedding arrangements, explained the Victorian language of flowers, and listened attentively to others' conversations. By dessert, even the most skeptical board members were smiling at her observations and questions. Her natural empathy drew people out, making them feel heard and understood. When she expressed genuine concern about Charles's recent knee surgery, his usual stern expression softened considerably. Photographers waited outside when they left, their cameras flashing frantically. Luis wrapped his arm protectively around Aria's waist, guiding her through the crowd to their waiting car. Inside its quiet sanctuary, she finally let out a long breath. "You were wonderful," Luis said softly. "Better than I could have hoped. Really, I felt so out of place at first. You brought something genuine to that table. It's rare in our world." He paused, studying her profile in the passing streetlights. "Thank you." That night, Aria could barely sleep, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend. "OMG, you're trending!" Sure enough, social media was exploding with photos and speculation about Luis Dalton's mysterious new fiancée. Fashion blogs praised her elegant but understated style. Business news wondered about the strategic implications. Gossip columns gushed about their obvious chemistry. Morning brought a new kind of chaos. When Aria arrived at Bloom & Grace, a line of customers stretched down the sidewalk. Women wanted to see the shop where the fairy tale began. Men wanted flower arrangements from the florist who captured a billionaire's heart. Her phone chimed with a text from Luis. "Board members impressed. Stock up 2 points. Victoria called you refreshing. How are you holding up?" Aria looked around her shop, now bustling with curious customers examining every bloom. "Overwhelmed but okay." She typed back. "Sold out of peonies by 9 a.m. Need anything?" His response came quickly. She smiled, touched by his concern. "Just trying to wrap my head around all this." "You're doing amazingly, truly." Throughout the day, Aria alternated between helping genuine customers and chatting with those who clearly just wanted to meet her. She found herself sharing flower meanings, suggesting arrangements, and quietly deflecting personal questions about Luis with a gentle, "We're just getting to know each other." By closing time, her feet ached and her voice was hoarse, but her sales ledger showed the best day in the shop's history. She climbed the stairs to her apartment above the store, changed into comfortable pajamas, and curled up in bed with her tablet. The internet was still buzzing. Photos from dinner showed her laughing at something Luis said, his expression softer than any public photo she'd seen of him before. Business articles praised the strategic genius of their engagement, noting how Luis's company stock had risen on the news. Style websites were already declaring her America's new sweetheart. One article particularly caught her eye. Tech Titan and Flower Girl, a modern fairy tale. The writer had picked up on small details, how Luis adjusted his pace to match hers, the way he listened intently when she spoke, how natural they looked together despite their different worlds. Aria touched the screen, studying a photo of them leaving the restaurant. She looked elegant but approachable, while Luis appeared more relaxed than his usual stern business photos. They fit together somehow, like complementary flowers in an arrangement. Her phone buzzed one last time for the night. Luis again. "Thank you for today. Sleep well?" Such simple words, but they carried weight. This was supposed to be just business, just a contract. But something else was happening, something neither of them had planned for. Aria felt it like a warm glow in her chest. Not quite romance, but possibility. Hope. She set her phone aside and leaned back against her pillows, surrounded by the gentle scent of flowers drifting up from her shop below. In less than 24 hours, her whole world had transformed. Yet somehow, incredibly, she didn't feel lost in Luis's world. She'd found her own way to belong there, bringing her authentic self to his polished universe. Sleep came easily that night, carrying her into dreams filled with camera flashes and gentle hands, business suits and flower petals, and the unexpected feeling that maybe, just maybe, this crazy plan might lead to something real. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Bloom & Grace's front windows as Aria arranged a display of fresh sunflowers. Her morning rush had finally settled, leaving her time to prepare for her evening meeting with Luis. They needed to review protocols for upcoming charity events, all part of their carefully orchestrated plan. The bell above the door chimed. Aria turned, expecting another curious customer, but instead found herself face to face with a sharp-eyed woman in a crisp blazer. "Miss Moore, I'm Patricia Wells from the Daily Chronicle." The reporter held up her press badge. "I was hoping we could talk about your engagement to Luis Dalton." "I'm sorry, but all press inquiries need to go through proper channels," Aria replied, just as Luis had coached her. Patricia's smile didn't waver. "What about your father's history with Dalton Tech? That must make for interesting dinner conversation." Aria's hand stilled on the sunflower stems. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Leon Moore, the Community Bridge Center lawsuit from 5 years ago?" Patricia pulled out her tablet. "Your father's center lost everything when Dalton Tech's management software crashed. They sued for damages but couldn't afford to fight it out in court." She studied Aria's face. "You didn't know?" Before Aria could respond, the shop door opened again. Luis stood there, his tall frame blocking the afternoon light. His expression darkened as he took in the scene. "Miss Wells," he said evenly, "I believe my office made it clear that unofficial interviews aren't welcome." "The public has questions, Mr. Dalton." Patricia turned to face him. "Like how your fiancé's father lost his life's work because of your company's negligence." Aria's world tilted sideways. She hadn't spoken to her father in years, not since he'd chosen his work over their family for the last time. She'd heard the center had closed, but never knew why. Luis's jaw tightened. "Miss Wells, please leave. Now." The reporter smiled thinly, dropping her business card on the counter. "Call me when you're ready to tell the real story, Miss Moore." After Patricia left, heavy silence filled the shop. Aria gripped the counter, her knuckles white. "Is it true?" Luis's shoulders sagged. "Yes. It was before I took direct control of our charitable division. The software failure affected dozens of non-profits. We tried to make it right, but—" He trailed off, pain evident in his eyes. "My father never told me." Aria's voice cracked. "We weren't speaking then, haven't spoken since." Luis stepped closer, reaching for her hand, then stopping himself. "Aria, I'm so sorry. If I'd known the connection." "You wouldn't have chosen me for this arrangement?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "That's not what I meant." He ran a hand through his hair. "We should discuss this properly. Come to my penthouse this evening as planned?" Aria nodded numbly, barely registering when he left. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of customers and arrangements, her mind spinning with questions about her father, Luis, and the truth behind their carefully constructed facade. That evening, she rode the private elevator to Luis's penthouse, her heart heavy. The doors opened to voices carrying from his home office. Luis was on a video call with his board. "This is exactly what we were worried about," a stern voice declared. "The Moore connection is a liability we can't afford." "It's being handled," Luis replied firmly. "Is it? Because right now, all we see is a PR nightmare waiting to happen. Drop her, Luis. Find someone else before this tanks the merger." Aria stood frozen in the hallway, each word striking like a physical blow. "The merger isn't everything," Luis argued, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's worth billions, your father's legacy, everything you've built." The board member's voice hardened. "Don't let some florist destroy it all." Aria's chest tightened. Some florist. That's all she was to them. All she'd ever be. Luis's office door was partially open. Through the gap, she could see him pacing, his usual confidence replaced by tension. He looked torn, trapped between duty and something else. something that made him glance at the framed photo of his late wife on his desk. Arya stepped back quietly, her heels silent on the thick carpet. The truth hit her with crushing clarity. She wasn't just playing a role anymore. She'd started to believe in the possibility of something real between them. But to Luis's world, to his board, she was nothing more than a way to close a deal. She turned and walked to the elevator, her movements mechanical. The doors closed silently behind her, and she descended alone into the cool night, leaving behind the fantasy she'd briefly allowed herself to believe in. All around her, the city glittered with its usual evening magic, but Arya barely noticed. Her heart felt as heavy as her steps as she made her way home, where fresh flowers waited to be arranged and dreams of fairy tales needed to be packed away for good. As Arya rode the taxi home that night, streetlights blurred through her tears. Her phone felt heavy in her hands as she composed the message to Luis. She deleted and rewrote it 3 times before finally pressing send. "Mr. Dalton, I'm formally withdrawing from our arrangement. Please have your lawyer send termination paperwork to my shop. Until then, let's keep things strictly professional. Thank you for the opportunity. Arya Moore." She turned her phone off immediately, not wanting to see his response. Inside her small apartment, she kicked off her heels and curled up on her worn couch, wrapping herself in the quilt her aunt had made her. The familiar scent of lavender fabric softener usually brought comfort, but tonight it couldn't ease the ache in her chest. Across town, Luis stood at his penthouse window, staring at Arya's message until his phone screen went dark. He'd been dreading this moment since hearing the reporter's revelations, but the reality hit harder than expected. His reflection in the glass looked haunted, the same expression he'd worn after losing Claire. He poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, but left it untouched on his desk. Sleep wouldn't come tonight. Instead, he found himself opening his laptop, pulling up old photos of Claire. Their wedding day. Vacations. The last Christmas before her illness. His throat tightened as he realized something. In the years since losing her, he'd wrapped himself in work and wealth like armor, refusing to feel anything deeply. Until Arya. The night stretched endlessly as Luis paced his penthouse, remembering how Arya's genuine warmth had started melting his carefully constructed walls, how her smile made board meetings bearable, how she'd brought light back into his life without even trying. Now she was gone, and the darkness felt heavier than before. Morning found him outside Bloom and Grace, coffee cooling in his hand as he stared at the handwritten sign in the window. "Family emergency, back tomorrow." The neat cursive somehow made the lie hurt more. He knew there was no emergency, just his own failures coming back to haunt them both. Inside his car, Luis's driver waited patiently as his boss stood on the sidewalk far longer than necessary. Finally, Luis turned away from the closed shop. "Home, James?" he said quietly, his voice rough from a sleepless night. Back in his penthouse, Luis moved through his morning routine mechanically until he reached his closet. Claire's photos still hung there, his private shrine to their love. He touched one frame gently, remembering how she'd always pushed him to be better, to feel more, to live fully. "I've been numb for so long," he whispered to her image, hiding behind spreadsheets and acquisitions, and now... He swallowed hard. Now I might have lost someone else special, because I couldn't protect her from my world. Meanwhile, Arya sat in her aunt's cozy kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. Aunt Lila listened patiently as the whole story spilled out. The contract, the reporter, the overheard board meeting. "I feel so stupid," Arya confessed, wiping fresh tears. "Thinking I could step into his world without getting hurt. Believing maybe—" She couldn't finish the thought. Aunt Lila reached across the table, covering Arya's hand with her own. "Baby girl, Being open to love isn't stupid. Neither is protecting your heart when you need to. But I'm humiliated. Everyone will be talking about it. The florist who thought she could be a billionaire's wife. Aria's voice cracked. I just wanted to save my shop. Instead, I've made everything worse. Listen to me, Aunt Lila said firmly. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You took a chance, showed kindness, and handled yourself with grace. That's the Aria Moore I raised. They talked until evening, Aunt Lila's wisdom and love helping Aria find her footing again. When Aria finally headed home, her aunt's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes God closes doors to protect us, but he never leaves us without hope. That night, Aria prepared her shop for reopening, conditioning roses and arranging fresh displays with mechanical precision. Her hands knew the work even if her heart wasn't in it. She'd built this little haven of beauty from nothing once before. She could do it again. As dawn broke the next morning, Aria stood behind her counter, straightening already perfect ribbons. Her eyes were tired, but her spine was straight. She might not be enough for Louise Dalton's world, but she was enough for this, creating beauty, serving others, living with integrity. The morning sun streamed through her window, catching the crystal vase display and sending rainbows dancing across the walls. Aria took a deep breath, unlocked her door, and flipped her sign to open. Whatever came next, she would face it with grace, just as she always had. The morning sun cast long shadows through Bloom and Grace's front windows as Aria arranged a fresh delivery of hydrangeas. The shop had been quiet all morning, giving her too much time to think about everything that had happened. A soft chime from the door drew her attention, and her heart skipped when she saw Luis standing there, looking more casual than she'd ever seen him in a simple blue button-down and khakis. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of sleepless nights. "I was hoping we could talk, if you have time." Aria glanced around the empty shop, then nodded slowly. "I have time." She gestured to the small table where they'd first signed the contract that now felt like a lifetime ago. Luis sat down, his usual corporate polish replaced by something more vulnerable. "First, I need to apologize," he began, running a hand through his slightly disheveled hair. "I've handled this situation poorly from the start. When the reporter revealed the connection to your father's non-profit, I should have been honest with you immediately." Aria's fingers traced patterns on the wooden tabletop. "Yes, you should have. The software failure that affected your father's community center, it wasn't just a glitch. It was a rushed release that we knew had problems, but the board pushed it through anyway." Luis's voice filled with regret. "We hurt a lot of good people trying to help their communities. I've carried that guilt for years." "Did you know?" Aria asked quietly. "About my father's center specifically?" Luis shook his head. "Not until the reporter mentioned it. But that doesn't excuse my reaction. Instead of protecting you from my board's manipulation, I let you walk away thinking you were just a business deal." The morning light caught the dust motes dancing between them as silence settled. Finally, Aria spoke. "You're not the only one who needs to apologize. I ran away instead of talking it through. Maybe I was looking for an excuse because it all felt too overwhelming." Over the next several days, Aria noticed something changing in her routine. During her volunteer shifts at First Baptist's food pantry, she kept catching glimpses of a familiar figure in the background. Luis worked quietly, carrying boxes and sorting donations, declining any special attention from the other volunteers who recognized him. "He's been here every day this week," Mrs. Jenkins, the pantry coordinator, told Aria on Thursday. "Showed up Monday morning asking how he could help. No cameras, no press releases, just works harder than anyone I've seen." Aria watched from across the room as Luis helped an elderly woman carry her groceries to her car. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, looking more human than Billionaire. The sight stirred something in her chest she thought she'd locked away. Each evening that week, as Aria prepared to close her shop, Luis would appear with 2 cups of tea from the cafe down the street. They would sit at the small table, surrounded by the day's remaining flowers, and talk with an honesty they'd never managed before. "I've been thinking about what you said about my father," Aria shared on Wednesday evening, warming her hands around her cup. "I haven't spoken to him in 7 years. After Mum died, he just disappeared into his work. The community center became his whole life." "Is that why you started the flower shop?" Luis asked gently. "To create something beautiful from the pain?" Aria nodded, surprised by his insight. Flowers don't hide their broken parts. They just keep growing anyway. On Thursday, Luis opened up about Claire for the first time. "After losing her, I thought if I worked hard enough, succeeded enough, I could outrun the grief. The board took advantage of that, pushing me toward bigger deals, more acquisitions. I lost myself somewhere along the way." "Until," Aria prompted softly. "Until I walked into a flower shop and watched someone perform CPR on a stranger without hesitation." His smile was gentle. "You reminded me there's more to life than quarterly reports." By Friday evening, something had shifted between them. A delicate trust rebuilding itself one honest conversation at a time. As Luis walked Aria home through the quiet streets, their steps fell into an easy rhythm. They paused beneath a street lamp, its warm glow creating a small circle of light around them. The early spring air carried the scent of blooming cherry trees from the park nearby. "Thank you," Aria said quietly, "for showing up this week, for doing the work without expecting anything in return." Luis's eyes were soft as they met hers. "Thank you for giving me the chance to try." Standing there in the gentle light, they felt the return of something warm and tentative between them, not the manufactured connection of their contract, but something real growing in its place. Neither moved to close the distance, content for now in this moment of possibility. "Good night, Luis," Aria said softly, her smile genuine for the first time in days. "Good night, Aria," he replied, watching as she walked up the steps to her apartment building. The street lamp continued its quiet vigil as Luis turned toward home, both of them carrying a lighter heart than they'd had in days. The Monday morning sun streamed through Bloom and Grace's front windows, catching the crystal vase Luis had brought Aria during his first coffee delivery of the week. It was becoming their routine, him arriving just after the morning rush at his office, carrying 2 steaming cups and a warmth in his eyes that made her heart flutter. "I remembered you like honey in yours," he said, setting the cup beside her workstation where she was arranging pink peonies. "You're getting good at this?" Aria smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Much better than those first awkward dinner parties." They settled into their usual spots. Aria perched on her work stool, Luis leaning against the counter. The shop was quiet except for the gentle hum of the coolers. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Luis said, his voice soft, "about why your shop caught my attention that first day." Aria tilted her head, curious. "I thought it was just a chance to escape your meetings." "Partly," he admitted, "but I recognized your work. 3 years ago, during the Children's Hospital fundraiser, you created these incredible centerpieces, white lilies with blue delphiniums." Recognition flickered in Aria's eyes. "I remember those. It was one of my first big events." "Claire was there that night," Luis continued, his voice catching slightly on his late wife's name. "She was already sick, though we hadn't told anyone yet. The arrangements brought her so much joy. She said they made her feel like heaven was reaching down to touch earth. Tears welled in Aria's eyes as Luis reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a worn photograph. It showed a beautiful woman with kind eyes sitting at a gala table, her fingers gently touching one of Aria's arrangements. "She wrote down the name of your shop," Luis said. "Said whoever created these must have a special connection to God's grace. When I walked in that day and saw you helping that jogger, it felt like Claire had somehow led me here." Aria's hand found his across the counter, squeezing gently. "Tell me more about her." They spent the next hour sharing stories, Luis speaking about Claire's battle with cancer, her determination to find beauty even in her darkest days, her peaceful acceptance at the end. Aria listened, her heart aching for the love and loss in his voice. As the days progressed, their conversations deepened. During a quiet Wednesday evening at the shop, Aria opened up about her own past. After Mum died, Dad threw himself into running the community center, she explained, arranging the last of the day's flowers in the cooler. "It was his way of dealing with grief, I guess. But I was 16, needing my father, and he just wasn't there anymore." Luis watched her from his spot near the counter, his presence steady and supportive. The center became everything to him. She continued, "I'd stop by after school hoping to connect, but he was always in meetings or writing grant proposals. When I told him I wanted to open a flower shop instead of going to college, he said I was wasting my potential." Aria's voice cracked slightly. "That was the last real conversation we had." "Is that why you're so afraid of being used?" Luis asked gently. "Because the people you loved chose other priorities?" Aria looked up, surprised by his insight. "Maybe. I guess I'm still learning to trust that someone can choose me first." Their late-night conversations became a cherished ritual. Thursday evening found them walking through the park after closing time, street lamps casting a soft glow on the path. "The board meeting's tomorrow," Luis mentioned casually. "They're expecting me to announce I've ended our engagement." Aria's step faltered slightly. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," he said, stopping to face her. "That I'm not making any decisions based on their manipulation anymore, that I'm choosing what matters, not what looks good on paper." The weight of his words hung between them, full of possibility. Friday evening arrived with the charity gala they'd scheduled weeks ago, an event that was supposed to be part of their contract. Now, as Luis helped Aria from the car, cameras flashing around them, everything felt different. Aria wore a deep blue gown that seemed to catch starlight, her hair swept up elegantly. Luis couldn't take his eyes off her as they entered the ballroom. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his hand warm against her back. Unlike their first public appearance, there was no need to pretend. They moved through the crowd naturally, their laughter genuine, their touches unscripted. When Aria charmed a group of potential donors with stories about the language of flowers, Luis watched her with undisguised admiration. As the evening wound down, the orchestra began playing something slow and sweet. Luis held out his hand. "Dance with me?" On the dance floor, Aria fit perfectly in his arms, her head finding its place against his shoulder. They swayed gently to the music, the rest of the world fading away. "This feels different," Aria murmured. "Everything's different," Luis replied softly, his hand tightening slightly at her waist. As the music played on, Aria closed her eyes, letting herself feel the steady beat of Luis's heart against her cheek. This wasn't part of any contract or performance. This was real, wonderfully, and terrifyingly real. She could feel herself falling, like petals drifting on a gentle breeze, into something deeper than she'd ever known. Luis's cheek rested against her hair, his own heart full of emotions he'd thought long buried. In the soft light of the ballroom, holding the woman who'd brought color back into his world, he realized he was falling in love, not with the idea of her, but with every genuine, beautiful piece of who she was. They continued dancing, neither wanting the moment to end, both knowing that something precious and true had bloomed between them. The morning after the gala dawned clear and crisp, with sunlight dancing across the lake's surface. Luis had chosen a small cafe tucked away from the city's bustle, its wooden deck extending over the water. As Arya stepped out of his car, the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries mingled with the clean morning air. "This is beautiful," she said, taking in the view. Small boats dotted the lake's surface, and ducks paddled lazily near the shore. Luis pulled out a chair for her at a corner table, partially hidden by trailing plants. "I thought we could use some quiet after last night." The waitress brought them steaming mugs of coffee and fresh-baked scones. For a moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the light play on the water. "Last night felt different," Luis finally said, his fingers wrapped around his coffee mug. "Being with you, it wasn't about the cameras or the contract anymore." Arya's heart fluttered as she met his gaze. "I felt it too. When Claire died," he continued softly, "I thought that part of me died with her. I built walls around everything, my heart, my company, my life. But you—" He reached across the table, taking her hand. "You make me feel alive again. Not just existing, but truly living." Tears pricked at Arya's eyes. "I was so scared of being used again, of being someone's second choice. But with you, I feel safe. Like I can just be myself, and that's enough." "It's more than enough," Luis assured her, squeezing her hand. "You're extraordinary, Arya Moore." They spent the morning talking about everything and nothing, their hopes, their fears, their favorite books and movies. The contract that had brought them together seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by something far more precious and real. Over the next few days, their relationship blossomed naturally. They found themselves drawn to the lake, spending quiet afternoons walking along its shore. Luis would point out different birds, sharing knowledge from his childhood bird-watching days. Arya would collect interesting leaves and pebbles, seeing potential decorations for her flower arrangements. At Bloom and Grace, Luis started dropping by not just at closing time, but throughout the day. He'd sit quietly in the corner with his laptop while Arya worked, occasionally looking up just to watch her arrange flowers or help customers. Her natural warmth and kindness never failed to amaze him. "You're staring again?" she teased one afternoon, catching his eye as she finished a bridal bouquet. "Can't help it," he replied with a smile. "You're beautiful when you work." One evening, Luis invited her to his penthouse to cook dinner together. The kitchen, though state-of-the-art, had clearly seen little use. "Claire was the cook," he explained, somewhat sheepishly. "I've mostly been living on takeout since—" Arya squeezed his arm gently. "Then it's time we changed that. Show me where you keep the pots and pans." They decided to make something simple. Pasta with fresh vegetables and garlic bread. Arya taught Luis how to chop onions properly, laughing at his watering eyes. He learned quickly, though, and soon they fell into an easy rhythm. Chopping, stirring, tasting, adjusting seasonings. "This is nice," Arya said, watching Luis carefully stir the sauce. "Just normal. Real." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Real is good. Real is what I want with you." The kitchen filled with the smell of herbs and garlic, and soon they were sitting at Luis's rarely used dining table, sharing food they'd made together. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, but neither paid them much attention, too absorbed in each other's company. These simple moments, Cooking together, sharing meals, talking about their days, began to weave themselves into the fabric of their lives. Luis found himself smiling more, laughing easier. Arya felt her old fears slowly melting away, replaced by a growing trust in what they were building together. Midweek found them back at the lake, sharing a bench and watching the sunset. Luis had brought coffee in a thermos, and they passed it back and forth, enjoying the peaceful moment. "I never thought I could have this again," Luis admitted quietly. "This kind of happiness." Arya leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything," he whispered, pulling her closer. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by Luis's phone buzzing insistently. He checked it with a frown. "It's the board. They're calling an emergency meeting." Arya felt a flutter of anxiety. "Now." "I have to go," he said apologetically, standing up. "But I'll call you as soon as it's over." Before leaving, he drew her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Everything will be fine," he assured her, though something in his eyes betrayed concern. Arya watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the gathering dusk. The warmth of his kiss lingered on her skin, but a chill had crept into the evening air. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, trying to hold on to the peace they'd found together, even as uncertainty whispered at the edges of her mind. Luis's footsteps echoed through the marble lobby of Dalton Technologies headquarters. The emergency board meeting notification had left a heavy weight in his stomach, pulling him away from what had been a perfect afternoon with Arya. The elevator seemed to crawl upward, each floor bringing him closer to whatever crisis awaited. When he entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. 8 stern faces greeted him, their usual professional masks tinged with something darker. Marcus Chen, the lead board member, stood at the head of the table, a thick folder in front of him. "Luis," Marcus began, his voice carefully controlled, "we've discovered something concerning." Luis took his seat, straightening his tie. "What seems to be the problem?" Marcus slid several documents across the polished table. "These are financial records showing a substantial payment made to Clearview Properties 3 days ago. The amount exactly matches the back rent owed on a certain flower shop." The air left Luis's lungs. He had been careful with that transaction, using his personal accounts, but somehow they'd traced it. "You used company resources to access tenant information," Marcus continued. "Then made a $100,000 payment to prevent your girlfriend's eviction, all while keeping this intervention hidden from both the board and Miss Moore herself." "My personal finances are not board business," Luis said firmly, though his heart was racing. Another board member, Patricia Walsh, spoke up. "They become board business when they demonstrate compromised judgment. This behavior shows emotional instability and financial misconduct. The timing, mere weeks before our merger with Global Tech, is particularly troubling." Luis's jaw tightened. "I used my own money to help someone in need. There's nothing unstable about that." "The board disagrees," Marcus said. "This, combined with your hasty engagement to Miss Moore, which we now know was initially contractual, paints a picture of a CEO who's lost objectivity. The merger partners are already expressing concerns." Luis felt the walls closing in. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Marcus placed 3 documents on the table. "We're giving you 3 options. 1. You publicly end your relationship with Miss Moore. 2. You sign the merger agreement as planned. 3. You step down from your position afterward." "And if I refuse?" Luis's voice was dangerously quiet. "Then we'll have no choice but to terminate you with cause," Patricia said. "The evidence of misconduct is clear. Your reputation in the industry would be severely damaged." Luis stared at the documents, his vision blurring slightly. Everything he'd built over 15 years, his company, his legacy, his employees' livelihoods, balanced against the woman who had brought light back into his life. "You have 24 hours to decide," Marcus concluded. The drive home was a blur. Luis's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had texted Aria asking her to meet him at his penthouse, knowing he had to tell her everything. When she arrived, her smile faded as soon as she saw his face. "Luis, what happened?" He led her to the living room, where they sat on the plush sofa overlooking the city. Slowly, painfully, he recounted the board meeting, watching as horror dawned in her eyes. "You paid my rent?" she whispered. "Without telling me. I couldn't bear to see you worried." He admitted, "I wanted to help, but I knew you'd refuse if I offered directly." Aria stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "So all this time you've been, what? Secretly managing my life? Like I'm some charity case?" "No, Aria, that's not. And now you're going to lose everything because of me." Her voice cracked. "Your company, your reputation, everything you've worked for." Luis rose to reach for her, but she stepped back. "None of that matters compared to what we have." "It should matter." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You built that company from nothing. You employ thousands of people, and I'm just a florist who can't even pay her own rent." "Aria, please, I can't be responsible for destroying your life," she said, her voice breaking. "I won't be." She moved towards the door, her steps unsteady. Luis followed, his heart pounding. "We can figure this out together. Please don't walk away." Aria paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "I'm doing this because I care about you too much to watch you throw everything away." She took a shuddering breath. "Goodbye, Luis." The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through Luis's entire body. He stood there, staring at the space where she had been, feeling as though all the air had been sucked from the room. Finally, he moved to the kitchen on autopilot. He had planned to cook dinner for them both, a new recipe he'd been practicing. The ingredients sat untouched on the counter. Fresh herbs, vegetables, carefully selected cuts of meat. He had wanted to surprise her, to create another memory together in this kitchen that had finally started to feel like a home again. Luis sank into a chair at his dining table, the same spot where they had shared so many meals and conversations. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights blurred into streaks of color as tears filled his eyes. The penthouse felt impossibly empty, the silence deafening. He reached for his phone, wanting desperately to call her, to find the words that would make her come back. But he knew Aria, knew her heart, her pride, her fierce desire to protect those she cared about. She wouldn't answer. The untouched ingredients mocked him from the counter, a reminder of the future they'd been building, now shattered. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of lights and shadows, unaware that in a penthouse high above, a man's world had just fallen apart for the second time in his life. Luis woke to the harsh buzz of his phone against the nightstand. The screen showed 37 unread emails, 12 missed calls, and a flood of text messages. His head pounded as he scrolled through the notifications, each one worse than the last. Emergency investor call required. Stock dropping in pre-market trading. Public speculation about relationship status. Board considering emergency measures. Sunlight streamed through the windows of his penthouse bedroom, but Luis felt nothing but darkness pressing in. He clicked Aria's contact photo and pressed call, knowing it would likely go straight to voicemail. It did. "Aria," he said after the beep, his voice rough. "Please, just let me explain. We can find another way." He paused, fighting the tightness in his throat. "I miss you." Across town, Aria stood in bloom and grace, mechanically arranging white roses for a wedding order. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed. though she'd tried her best to cover it with makeup. The familiar motions of trimming stems and adjusting blooms gave her hands something to do, even as her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The bell above the door chimed. "Good morning," she called out, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "Morning, dear." Mrs. Peterson, a regular customer, replied. "Are you feeling all right? I saw the news about you and that handsome CEO." Aria's hands trembled slightly as she positioned another rose. "Just a little under the weather. What can I help you with today?" Throughout the morning, similar exchanges repeated. Customers tried to probe gently or simply gave her sympathetic looks. Each interaction felt like salt in an open wound. When her phone buzzed with Luis's call, she turned it face down, blinking back tears. By the second day, Luis's company was in freefall. The merger partners had publicly expressed serious concerns about leadership stability. 3 major investors had scheduled emergency meetings to discuss pulling their backing. The board sent him a formal notice of their intent to convene an emergency session regarding his removal. Luis sat in his office, staring at the downtown skyline through his window. 15 years of work crumbling before his eyes. His assistant knocked softly. "Sir, the PR team needs your statement about—" She hesitated. "About the end of your engagement." "There is no statement," he said quietly. "Tell them I'm not available." That evening, Aria worked late, keeping her hands busy with inventory counts and cleaning. Anything to avoid going home to her empty apartment where memories of Luis waited. As she counted bundles of baby's breath for the 3rd time, her aunt called. "Baby girl, you need to stop punishing yourself," her aunt said gently. "I'm not," Aria protested weakly. "I'm just catching up on work." "You're hiding, just like you did after your daddy left." Aria's throat tightened. "This is different. I'm protecting him." "Are you sure about that? Or are you protecting yourself from getting hurt again?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. By the 3rd day, Luis felt like he was drowning. The board had scheduled his removal hearing for the following Monday. The stock had dropped 20%. Reporters camped outside his building, shouting questions about his emotional stability and relationship scandal. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Luis found himself driving aimlessly. Without conscious decision, he pulled into the parking lot of Aria's church, Grace Community Chapel. The building was mostly dark, save for a few maintenance lights casting a soft glow through the stained glass windows. The heavy wooden doors were unlocked. Luis slipped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty sanctuary. The space smelled of wood polish and candle wax. He slid into a back pew, the wood smooth and worn beneath his hands. Luis couldn't remember the last time he'd prayed properly. Quick, desperate bargains during his wife's illness didn't count. Looking up at the cross hanging above the altar, he felt small in a way that had nothing to do with his current troubles. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," he whispered into the silence. "I've made such a mess of everything. I thought I was protecting my company, my legacy. But I've hurt the one person who made me feel alive again." Moonlight filtered through the stained glass, painting patterns on the floor. Luis's voice grew stronger. "I've spent years building walls, telling myself it was about responsibility and duty. But maybe I was just afraid of losing someone again, afraid of being vulnerable." He wiped his eyes. "Aria showed me there's more to life than balance sheets and board meetings. She taught me how to feel again, how to care about people instead of just profits." The quiet of the sanctuary wrapped around him like a blanket. For the first time in days, his mind cleared. "I don't want to be the man the board wants me to be anymore. I don't want to choose power over love again." His whispered words carried in the empty space. "Help me do the right thing." In that moment, looking at the gentle light playing across the altar, Luis knew with absolute clarity what he had to do. The company wasn't worth losing his soul over. It wasn't worth losing Aria. He remained in the pew, letting peace settle over him for the first time since the board meeting. The maintenance lights cast long shadows across the floor, but Luis no longer felt lost in darkness. He had found his way back to the light, back to what truly mattered. Tomorrow, he would fight. Not for the company, not for his position, but for the woman who had taught him how to love again. For the chance to be the man she believed he could be. The morning sunlight streamed through Luis's penthouse windows, warming his face as he sat at his desk. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from the board, but he ignored them all. After his night in the church, everything felt different, clearer. The weight of pretense had lifted from his shoulders. He opened his laptop and began typing, choosing his words carefully. This would be the most important speech of his life. Not because it would affect stock prices or merger deals, but because it would finally show his true heart. "Sir," his assistant called through the intercom, "the board is threatening to file an injunction if you don't respond to their calls." "Let them," Luis replied calmly. "I'll see them at the press conference." He picked up his phone and dialed Pastor Harris's number. The pastor answered on the second ring. "Luis, is everything all right?" "Pastor, I need your help. I'm holding a press conference at 2 o'clock today. Could you make sure Aria knows about it? I don't want to pressure her, but I need her to hear what I have to say." There was a thoughtful pause on the line. "You're choosing a different path, aren't you?" "Yes," Luis said softly. "The right one, finally. I'll make sure she knows." Luis spent the next few hours refining his statement, ignoring the mounting messages from board members and lawyers. His phone displayed 37 missed calls by noon. Each one strengthened his resolve. At his corporate headquarters, the press room filled quickly. Reporters whispered among themselves, speculating about the unexpected announcement. Camera crews adjusted their equipment while photographers tested their angles. The air crackled with anticipation. In the back of the room, Aria slipped in quietly, her heart pounding. Pastor Harris had told her about the press conference, saying only that she needed to be there. She found a spot near the wall, partially hidden behind a tall cameraman. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. At exactly 2 o'clock, Luis walked on to the small stage. He looked different than usual. No tie, his collar open, his face open and unguarded. The room fell silent as he approached the podium. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady. "I know there has been considerable speculation about recent events at Dalton Tech, about the merger, about my personal life, and about decisions made by both myself and the board." Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Aria held her breath. "For 15 years, I've built this company on innovation and determination, but somewhere along the way I lost sight of what truly matters. I became more concerned with stock prices than with people, with power rather than purpose." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. Though he couldn't see Aria, he could sense her presence. "The board has demanded I choose between my position and my heart. They want me to sacrifice personal integrity for corporate stability. They've threatened to remove me if I don't comply with their demands regarding my relationship with Aria Moore." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Several reporters began scribbling furiously. "So today I'm making my choice." Luis straightened his shoulders. "I am stepping down as CEO of Dalton Tech, effective immediately. I am rejecting the proposed merger that would have valued profits over people, and I am choosing to walk away from power to preserve my soul." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Camera flashes intensified. In her corner, Aria pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "To the board members watching this, I say, you can have the company. I'm choosing integrity instead." Luis's voice grew stronger, more passionate. And to the press who has speculated endlessly about my relationship with Aria Moore, let me be clear. She is not a deal. She is not a corporate strategy. She is the woman who taught me how to live again after years of merely existing. Aria's heart stopped for a moment. She gripped the wall behind her for support. She showed me that true success isn't measured in dollar signs, but in the lives we touch and the love we share. She reminded me that every person has value beyond what they can offer to a bottom line. The room exploded with questions. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting and waving their hands. But Luis wasn't finished. I'm not asking for sympathy or understanding. I'm simply choosing truth over pretense, love over power, and faith over fear. He smiled slightly. Thank you for your time. I won't be taking questions. The press room descended into chaos as Luis stepped away from the podium. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashed blindingly, and security guards moved to control the crowd. Through it all, Aria stood frozen in her corner, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. She slipped out a side door, needing air. The afternoon sun felt impossibly bright after the artificial lighting of the press room. A cool breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. She walked a few steps away from the building, her mind spinning with Luis's words. He had given up everything, his company, his position, his power. Not for a deal or a merger, but for love. For her. The realization made her legs weak, and she leaned against a nearby tree for support. Behind her, the glass doors of the building continued to buzz with activity as reporters rushed out, phones pressed to their ears, racing to file their stories. But Aria barely noticed them. She was lost in the echo of Luis's words. She taught me how to live again. The bell above Bloom and Grace chimed as Aria stepped inside her shop that afternoon. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. The fresh arrangements waiting for delivery, the mister gently spraying the orchids, the afternoon sun streaming through the front windows. Yet everything felt different. She moved through her familiar routine in a fog, her mind replaying Luis's words over and over. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing at that podium, choosing love over empire. The weight of his sacrifice pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages from friends, news alerts, social media mentions. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the simple task of caring for her flowers. The roses needed deadheading. The lilies needed fresh water. The world could wait. Luis didn't call or text. She appreciated that he understood her well enough to give her space, even now. Especially now. The next morning, Aria opened her shop to find a small group of regular customers waiting outside. Mrs. Peterson, who always ordered arrangements for her church, stepped forward first. "We saw the news," she said, pulling Aria into a warm hug. "We wanted you to know we're here for you, dear." Throughout the day, more community members dropped by. Some bought flowers, others simply wanted to chat. Pastor Harris stopped in with coffee and stayed for an hour, letting her talk through her jumbled feelings. "He gave up everything," Aria said softly, arranging stems of baby's breath. "His whole life's work." "Sometimes," Pastor Harris replied, "we have to lose everything to find what really matters." The media coverage surprised her. Instead of scandal, most outlets praised Luis's integrity. "Tech billionaire chooses love over power," read one headline. "Dalton's bold stand for personal truth," declared another. Comment sections filled with unexpected support, people touched by his willingness to be vulnerable and honest. On the second day, Aria's shop was busier than ever. Teachers from the local elementary school, regulars from the food pantry, even the jogger whose life she'd saved weeks ago. They all came bearing encouragement and kind words. You brought out the best in him, the jogger said, buying a small potted plant. That's a gift. Meanwhile, Luis quietly packed up his corporate penthouse. He'd found a modest condo in a peaceful neighborhood, away from the spotlight. No floor-to-ceiling windows or marble countertops. No private elevator or concierge service. Just a simple space where he could think, breathe, and rebuild. On the third evening, after closing the shop, Arya found herself gathering flowers almost unconsciously. White lilies for truth, pink roses for grace, sprigs of lavender for peace. Before she could talk herself out of it, she wrapped them in brown paper and headed to Luis's new address. The building was nice but understated, with brick walls and window boxes full of geraniums. Arya's heart pounded as she rode the elevator to the 4th floor. She hadn't called ahead. She wasn't even sure what she wanted to say. Luis opened the door looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. He wore jeans and a soft grey sweater, his feet bare on the hardwood floors. Moving boxes were scattered around the space behind him. "Arya," he breathed, surprise and joy mixing in his voice. "I brought you a housewarming gift," she said, holding out the flowers. "If that's okay." "Of course." He stepped back, inviting her in. "I was just making tea. Would you like some?" The condo was cozy and warm, with natural light filtering through gauzy curtains. Half-unpacked boxes lined the walls, but a comfortable couch and coffee table created an inviting sitting area. They settled there with steaming mugs of chamomile tea, both acutely aware of the space between them on the couch. The flowers sat in a simple glass vase on the coffee table, filling the air with their gentle fragrance. "I'm sorry I didn't call," Arya began. "Don't apologize," Luis said quickly. "You needed time. I understand. I was overwhelmed," she admitted, "by what you did, what you gave up." Luis set his mug down carefully. "I didn't give up anything that really mattered. The company, the position. It was all just trappings, empty success. But you built it from nothing. 15 years of your life. 15 years of hiding from life, you mean?" He turned to face her fully. "After Sarah died, I buried myself in work. I thought if I could just be successful enough, powerful enough, it would fill the void. But it only made the void bigger." Arya's hands tightened around her warm mug. "I was scared," she whispered. "When I walked away, I thought I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself, from getting hurt, from not being enough." "You've always been enough," Luis said softly. "More than enough. You were the first person in years who made me feel real. Not just a CEO or a billionaire or a widower. Just me." Tears pricked at Arya's eyes. "I was so angry at first, about the contract, about your board using our past against us. But then I realized something. All of it, even the hard parts, brought us here, to truth." Luis nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I keep thinking about that first day you helped me choose flowers. How peaceful your shop felt. How you didn't treat me any differently when you realized who I was. You just saw me." "And you saw me," Arya replied. "Not just the florist with the struggling shop. You saw my heart." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the evening light softening around them. A siren wailed in the distance, then faded. The flowers cast delicate shadows on the coffee table. "What happens now?" Arya asked finally. "I don't know exactly," Luis admitted. "I'm meeting with my lawyers tomorrow about transitioning the company. After that, I thought maybe I'd do some consulting, help smaller companies grow ethically, give back somehow." Arya smiled. "That sounds like you. The real you." "What about you?" he asked. "The shop is doing well, actually, better than ever, and I'm thinking of starting a program with the food pantry, teaching flower arranging to kids while their parents pick up groceries. something beautiful in the middle of hard times. Luis's eyes softened with admiration. You always find ways to spread light. The distance between them on the couch felt smaller now. Arya set her empty mug beside the flowers and turned toward him. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand over his, where it rested on the cushion between them. His fingers were warm beneath hers. Neither spoke the words hovering in their hearts. It wasn't quite time for that yet. But as the evening deepened around them, they both felt the shift. The future was opening before them like a flower reaching for the sun, full of possibility and hope. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Luis's new office space, casting warm light across boxes yet to be unpacked. He stood before a whiteboard covered in ideas and mission statements, marker in hand, as his small team of carefully selected advisors sat around a reclaimed wood conference table. The Dalton Foundation for Ethical Technology, Luis said, writing the words at the top. Our first priority is identifying and supporting non-profits that were negatively impacted by aggressive corporate practices, not just from my former company, but across the industry. Arya sat near the end of the table, her notebook open before her. She'd taken the morning off from the shop to help launch this initiative, and her heart swelled with pride watching Luis in his element. He looked lighter now, more alive, dressed in a casual button-down rather than his former corporate suits. Arya will be heading our community outreach, Luis continued, giving her a warm smile. Her experience running a small business and volunteering with local organizations gives her unique insight into the challenges these non-profits face. Over the next few days, they developed their strategy. Arya created a database of affected organizations, starting with her father's former community center. Each evening, she and Luis would stay late, sharing takeout dinner as they refined their approach. What if we offered more than just financial support? Arya suggested one night, picking at her pad thai. These organizations need sustainable solutions, technology training, infrastructure support, marketing help. Luis's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. We could create a whole network of support services. He reached for her hand across his desk. This is why I need you here. You see the heart of things. By the end of the week, they had their first round of outreach letters ready to send. Arya stared at the one addressed to Leon Moore, her father's name bringing a familiar ache to her chest. Luis noticed her hesitation. We don't have to send that one yet, he said gently. There's no rush. Arya took a deep breath. No, it's time. But would you sit with me while I call him? Luis pulled his chair closer as Arya dialed the number she hadn't called in years. Her hands trembled slightly as she put the phone on speaker. Hello? Her father's voice was exactly as she remembered. Dad. Arya's voice cracked slightly. It's me. Arya. There was a long pause. Baby girl, is everything okay? Yes, she said, gripping Luis's hand. I'm working with a new foundation that's trying to make things right, for organizations like your old community center. And I thought maybe we could talk. The conversation was awkward at first, years of hurt and misunderstanding creating careful pauses between words. But as Arya explained the foundation's mission, her father's voice grew warmer. I'm proud of you, he said finally, for using your heart to help others heal, just like your mama would have done. Tears slipped down Arya's cheeks as she ended the call. Luis wrapped his arms around her, letting her cry against his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me this chance to bridge the gap. Over the next few days, responses to their outreach letters began arriving. Organizations expressed cautious interest, some skeptical of help coming from a former corporate CEO. But Luis's sincerity and Arya's gentle approach began winning them over. They set up meetings in Arya's shop after hours, finding that the peaceful atmosphere of flowers and greenery helped put nervous non-profit directors at ease. Luis would share his vision while Aria served tea in mismatched cups, adding her practical insights about community needs. One evening, as they walked home from such a meeting, Luis stopped beneath a flowering cherry tree. "You know what amazes me?" he said, looking up at the pink blossoms. "How natural this feels. Working together, building something that matters. It's like all the pieces are finally falling into place." Aria smiled, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the evening breeze. "It feels like restoration, not just for the organizations we're helping, but for us too. You've helped me remember who I wanted to be before success clouded everything," Luis admitted. "And watching you rebuild things with your father, it gives me hope that broken things can be made beautiful again." Their relationship deepened through shared purpose. There were no more paparazzi or board meetings to navigate, just honest conversations over morning coffee and quiet moments between foundation meetings. They worked side by side daily, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Aria's father began calling regularly, short conversations at first, then longer ones. He shared stories about her mother that made her laugh and cry. Luis always knew when she'd had these calls, she'd come to their next meeting with red-rimmed eyes, but a peaceful smile. The foundation grew steadily, gaining support from unexpected places. Former board members who had opposed Luis's decision reached out privately to offer help. Local businesses volunteered services. The community rallied around their vision of ethical technology and restored relationships. 1 week after they launched, Luis watched Aria leading a workshop for non-profit directors, teaching them how to use new software systems the foundation had provided. Her natural warmth put everyone at ease as she simplified complex concepts into understandable pieces. As she answered questions with patience and grace, Luis felt something settle in his heart. This was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or public declarations, but quiet strength and shared purpose. He began thinking about rings, about perfect moments, about forever. But for now, he simply watched her work, grateful for second chances and the beauty that grows from broken places. Their story was still unfolding, like a flower opening one petal at a time, revealing new colors with each passing day. The foundation office slowly transformed, boxes unpacked, and walls filled with photos of their partner organizations. Aria brought in plants and flowers, adding life to every corner. It became a place of hope, where past hurts could be acknowledged and healed through purposeful action. Their days fell into a rhythm, mornings at the foundation, afternoons split between Aria's shop and community outreach, evenings spent planning next steps or simply enjoying each other's company. They were building something larger than themselves, something that would last. Luis kept a small velvet box hidden in his desk drawer, waiting for the right moment. Not a public spectacle this time, but something quiet and true, like their love had become. He watched Aria flourish in her new role, proud of her strength and grateful for her heart. The foundation was more than just their work now. It was their shared vision of what the world could be. One restored relationship at a time, one healed breach, one act of justice after another. Together, they were writing a new story, not of corporate power or contractual obligations, but of love that transforms everything it touches. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the city as Luis adjusted his collar for the 100th time. His heart raced with anticipation while he drove to pick up Aria for their Saturday morning foundation meeting. At least that's what she thought they were attending. He pulled up to Bloom and Grace right as Aria was locking the front door. She wore a simple sundress dotted with tiny flowers, her curls caught in the gentle spring breeze. Luis's breath caught in his throat. Even after all these months, her natural grace still amazed him. "You look beautiful," he said as she slipped into the passenger seat. Aria smiled, setting her purse down. "You're dressed awfully nice for a Saturday meeting," she teased, noting his pressed shirt and dress pants. "I thought we could make a quick stop first," Luis replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's something I want to show you at the botanical gardens." Aria's eyes lit up. "Really? I haven't been there in ages, not since you learned to arrange flowers there as a child." Luis finished, having memorized every detail she'd ever shared about her past. "I know." The drive was peaceful, filled with comfortable silence and occasional glances. Luis's hand found Aria's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The morning traffic thinned as they approached the gardens, leaving the busy city behind. When they arrived, the parking lot was surprisingly empty. Aria looked around, confused. "Are they even open yet?" "I may have called in a favor," Luis admitted, with a small smile. He led her toward the main entrance, where an elderly groundskeeper waited with a knowing grin. "Right this way, Mr. Dalton," the man said, unlocking the gate. "Everything's ready, just like you asked." Aria raised an eyebrow but followed along, her curiosity growing with each step. They walked past perfectly manicured lawns and flowering bushes, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The morning dew still clung to leaves and petals, making everything sparkle. As they approached the largest greenhouse, Aria gasped. Through the glass walls, she could see it was filled with her favorite flowers: lavender roses, pure white lilies, and countless wildflowers in every shade imaginable. But what caught her eye were the delicate strips of paper tied to various stems. "Luis?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He squeezed her hand and opened the greenhouse door. Warm, flower-scented air enveloped them as they stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through the glass panes, creating patterns on the stone pathway and illuminating their faces with a soft, golden glow. Aria moved slowly between the displays, reading the handwritten scripture verses on each stem. Her fingers traced the careful lettering as tears began forming in her eyes. "Love is patient, love is kind," she read from one. "It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." Another read, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Each verse spoke of love, faith, and new beginnings. Aria turned to find Luis, only to see him down on one knee in a patch of sunlight, holding a small velvet box. "Aria Moore," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You weren't away to close a deal. You were the reason I walked away from one." He opened the box, revealing a vintage-style ring with a simple, solitaire diamond. "You taught me that true success isn't measured in dollars or deals, but in how much love we give away. You showed me how to trust again, how to hope again." Tears flowed freely down Aria's cheeks now as Luis continued. "I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you, not just our foundation or your shop, but a family, a legacy of compassion and faith. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Aria whispered through her tears. "Yes, with all my heart." Luis slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling. Hands then stood to pull her into his arms. They held each other as morning light streamed around them, surrounded by flowers and scripture, symbols of their journey from a business arrangement to true love. The months that followed were filled with joyful preparation. They chose to have their wedding in the church garden, where Aria had volunteered since childhood. It seemed fitting to celebrate their love in a place that had witnessed so much of their story of redemption. On their wedding day, the garden bloomed with arrangements Aria had designed herself, mixing elegant roses with humble wildflowers. String lights twinkled in the trees, and wooden benches held their closest family and friends. Arya's father walked her down the aisle, their reconciliation one of the many miracles that had bloomed from this journey. Luis waited beneath an arch of flowers, looking at his bride with eyes full of wonder and gratitude. Their vows spoke of second chances and God's perfect timing, of love that grows stronger through trials and faith that anchors through storms. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden as they pledged their lives to each other. After the celebration, they threw themselves into their next project, expanding Bloom and Grace into a community center. The new space would combine Arya's flower shop with areas for foundation workshops, counseling services, and youth programs. On opening day, Luis and Arya stood hand in hand before the freshly painted doors. The morning sun caught Arya's wedding ring, sending sparkles dancing across the wall. "Ready?" Luis asked, squeezing her hand. Arya smiled up at him, her eyes shining with joy and purpose. "Ready." Together, they stepped forward into their shared destiny, a future built on compassion, redemption, and love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning into something more beautiful than either could have imagined. The doors opened to welcome their first visitors, and with them came the promise of more lives touched, more relationships restored, more beauty growing from broken places. Luis and Arya moved forward together, their love story becoming part of a larger narrative of hope and healing in their community. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the dewy grass as Arya and Luis walked hand in hand through the expanded community garden at Bloom and Grace. Just 2 days earlier, they had exchanged vows, choosing to spend their brief honeymoon in a peaceful countryside cabin rather than some elaborate destination. "Look how much the volunteers accomplished while we were away," Arya said softly, reaching out to touch a newly planted bed of wildflowers. The morning air carried the sweet scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Luis squeezed her hand. They really made this place their own. As they walked between the raised garden beds, checking the herbs and flowers, the first community members began arriving. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery down the street hurried over with a basket of still warm cinnamon rolls. "Welcome home, dears," she called out, wrapping Arya in a warm hug. More neighbors followed, each bringing their own greetings and small gifts. Mr. Chen from the hardware store brought fresh coffee in a thermos. Sarah, a local teacher, arrived with her young students for the morning's workshop. Arya gathered the children around a planting table, her eyes bright with joy. "Today we're going to plant something very special," she told them, holding up tiny packets of lavender seeds. "These flowers remind us that beautiful things take time and patience to grow." While Arya guided small hands in pressing seeds into soil, Luis met with foundation volunteers in the community room. They sat around a wooden table, planning their next fundraiser to support struggling local non-profits. Luis's eyes grew tender when they discussed the grant earmarked for Leon Moore's rebuilding project. The afternoon sun was softening when Leon himself arrived at the garden. Arya looked up from where she was storing leftover supplies and felt her heart steady instead of racing. For the first time in years, she didn't hesitate to approach her father. They sat together beneath the grapevine-covered arbor, the filtered sunlight creating gentle shadows around them. "The garden is beautiful, Arya," Leon said quietly. "Just like the ones your mother used to tend." Arya's fingers traced the wooden bench. "I thought about her when we were planning it, about how she always said gardens heal people. I'm sorry I forgot that after she died." Leon's voice cracked slightly. "I forgot a lot of important things." "We both did," Arya answered, reaching for his hand. "But we're here now." Luis joined them as the sun began to set, pulling up a chair without disturbing the delicate peace between father and daughter. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the gentle evening sounds of birds settling and leaves rustling. As darkness began to fall, Arya and Luis said goodbye to Leon and started their walk home. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting warm pools of light along their path. Arya leaned her head against Luis's shoulder as they walked. "What are you thinking about?" Luis asked softly. "About how we want to build our future," she replied. "About making sure it's filled with moments like today, serving others, healing relationships, showing people they matter." "That sounds perfect," Luis said, drawing her closer as they walked beneath the evening sky. "A life of compassion, service and love, especially the love part," he added with a gentle smile. "Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."